coffee mug had a chip on the handle, small, barely noticeable, right where my thumb naturally rested every morning. I'd had it since college, a plain white mug from a thrift store in Charlottesville, $0.50. Bought the week before finals when I was 20 and convinced that cheap coffee in a chipped mug was the most romantic form of suffering a person could have. My ex-husband Joel threw it in a box with the rest of what he called your stuff 11 days before our 5th anniversary. He didn't even wrap it. I heard it crack against the side of the cardboard when he set the box down on the front porch. He didn't flinch. He just looked at me the way he'd been looking at me for months, like I was an invoice he'd already disputed and lost, and said the movers were coming Thursday and he'd need my key by Wednesday night. 5 years. I kept waiting for my voice to work. It didn't. I took the box. I took my key off the ring right there on the porch in the November cold, with the neighbor's dog barking somewhere down the block. I set the key on the railing. I didn't throw it at him, didn't say anything I'd spent the drive home rehearsing. I just picked up the box and walked to my car. The mug was in 2 pieces. We'd met at a fundraiser in Richmond. The kind with past appetizers and people who were more interested in being seen than in whatever the cause actually was. Joel was charming in the way that reads as confidence until you've lived inside it long enough to understand it's something else entirely. He was 34. I was 27. He had good shoes and a firm handshake, and he remembered my name the second time he saw me, which felt significant at the time. We dated for 14 months. We were engaged for 8. We got married at a vineyard in the Shenandoah Valley on a Saturday in June, and my mother cried during the ceremony, and I thought she was crying because she was happy. I understand now that mothers sometimes cry because they see what you don't yet. The first year was fine. The second year, Joel got promoted, and something shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a house settles, slowly, in places you don't notice until a door won't close right anymore. He started managing things, the finances. First, just let me handle it, you're not great with numbers, and then the calendar, and then eventually the version of me that was allowed to show up to dinners with his colleagues. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist. I work with kids, mostly ages 3 to 10, helping them build the motor skills and sensory regulation they need to function in classrooms and in the world. It's not glamorous. It doesn't come with a title that sounds impressive at fundraisers. Joel stopped mentioning what I did after the first year. If someone asked, he'd say, she works with kids, and move the conversation along. By year 3, I'd stopped correcting him. The children question started around then too. Joel wanted them, or said he did, but the timing was never right. His work was too demanding. We needed to travel more first. We needed a bigger house. We needed to wait until things settled. And then, when things didn't settle fast enough, the framing changed. Quietly, incrementally, the way all of Joel's reframings worked. He started implying it was me, not in one conversation, never one conversation, in comments. In sighs, in the way he paused before answering when someone at dinner asked if we were thinking about children, in the way he told his mother, within earshot of me at Thanksgiving, that these things take time, and some people have a harder time than others. I went to my OB. I had tests done. Everything came back normal. I showed Joel the results. He said, "That's just one doctor. I found a different doctor. Same results." He stopped bringing it up after that. So did I. We just existed in the space where the conversation used to be. The separation conversation happened on a Tuesday. He was calm. That was the worst part, how calm he was, like he'd been practicing. He said we'd grown apart. He said he needed someone who matched where he was in life. He said he hoped I understood. I sat on the couch we picked out together at a furniture store in Carytown, and I nodded like I was in a meeting. The prenuptial agreement he'd had drawn out before the wedding gave me 60 days to vacate the house, a lump sum of $4,000, and whatever I'd brought into the marriage. I hadn't had an independent attorney review it before I signed. I'd been 28, and in love, and the word prenuptial had felt like a technicality. The way you sign terms and conditions on software you're sure you'll never need to dispute. Joel's family attorney had written it. I understand now what that means. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a building called Sycamore Commons, which had nothing to do with sycamores and shared very little in common with anything I call common. It was fine. It was beige. It had a kitchen window that looked out onto the parking lot and a radiator that clicked every night at 2 a.m., like it was trying to remind me it was there. The building had 3 floors. I was on the second. The apartment across the hall from mine sat empty for the first 3 weeks. Then someone moved in on a Wednesday. I didn't see him move in. I was at work. I only knew because the hallway smelled faintly of pine cleaner that evening, and there was a pair of worn leather work boots outside the door. I didn't think anything of it. The first time I actually saw him was a Friday morning, 2 weeks after I'd moved in. I was late. I had an 8 a.m. evaluation across town and I'd overslept by 15 minutes, and I was trying to lock my door and hold my coffee thermos and pull my bag strap onto my shoulder all at the same time, and I dropped my keys. They slid under the radiator at the end of the hall. I said a word I typically reserve for emergencies. I can get that. He was already coming out of his door. Tall, maybe 6'1", in a gray Henley and work pants, dark hair that needed cutting. He crouched down by the radiator without making it a thing, fished the keys out with 2 fingers, and held them out to me. "Thank you," I said. "I'm a disaster this morning." "You've got your bag caught on the door handle," he said. I did. I'd been dragging my apartment door with me for a full 30 seconds. He waited while I sorted myself out. Didn't laugh. Didn't say anything else. Just waited. Like it was completely ordinary to watch a stranger untangle herself from her own door. "I'm in 204, I said, because I felt like I should say something. "Just moved in." "I know," he said. "I'm across the hall, Garrett." "Elise." He nodded once. Went back inside. That was it. I learned things about Garrett the way you learn things about people you share walls with, slowly, without meaning to. He kept odd hours, sometimes leaving before 6, sometimes not until 9. He had a black truck, older model, always parked in the same spot. He cooked. I could smell it through the hallway sometimes. Garlic and onion, and something that once, on a Sunday, was unmistakably a proper roast, the kind that takes hours. He had a dog, a big Belgian Malinois named Scout, which I discovered because the dog sat next to him in the elevator one evening and stared at me with the focused stillness of someone who had been professionally trained to assess threats and had not yet decided I wasn't one. "She's friendly," Garrett said. "She's just deciding." "Deciding what? Whether you're worth her time." Scout sniffed my hand, then sat back down and looked away. I chose to interpret this as approval. He held the elevator door open. I said thank you. He said nothing, which I was beginning to understand was not rudeness, but simply how he was. I didn't ask what he did. He didn't offer it. In December, my car wouldn't start on a Thursday morning. I'd gone down to the parking lot at 7:15, turned the key, and gotten the particular silence that means a battery has given up on life entirely. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, trying to do the math Uber. Distance to work, whether I had a client at 8 or 8:30, and then Garrett was there, appearing at my passenger window with jumper cables like this was something he'd known was going to happen. "Pop the hood," he said. "You don't have to. I'm not doing anything until 9. He had my car running in 6 minutes. He wouldn't take the $20 I tried to give him. He just put the cables back in his truck and said, "Get it to AutoZone this weekend, they'll test the battery free," and went back inside. I sat in my running car and thought about the fact that my ex-husband had once let me pay for a cab for 3 weeks while my car sat in our driveway needing a part he'd said he'd order. January was hard in the way that Januaries are when you're living alone for the first time in 5 years, and the holiday noise has gone quiet, and the beige walls are very much just beige walls. I called my mom on Sunday nights. I got into a routine work, the gym 2 blocks away, dinner, whatever novel I was currently unable to focus on, sleep. I got better at sleeping alone. I stopped waking up at 3 a.m., expecting the weight of someone else on the other side of the mattress. I ran into Garrett on a Saturday at the Kroger 4 blocks away. He was in the produce section, holding a butternut squash and reading the back of it like it had instructions. "There's nothing on it," I said. "It's a squash." He looked up. trying to figure out how long to roast it. 400 degrees, 45 minutes, cut side down with a little olive oil. He put it in his basket. You cook. I grew up in a household where my mother believed casseroles could solve most problems. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but in the neighborhood. Did they? Jury's still out. We ended up walking through the store at roughly the same pace. Not exactly together, but not separately either. He was buying for the week, organized, efficient, nothing frivolous. I was buying in the scattered way at someone who hadn't meal planned since the marriage ended and was still adjusting to cooking for one. At the checkout, he said, "You should come for dinner sometime, if you want. I made too much last week and just threw half of it out." I looked at him. I'm not saying it as anything other than the offer, he said, in the flat, factual tone that I was learning meant he was slightly uncomfortable but was going to say the thing anyway. Cooking for one is annoying. It is, I said. Tuesday, if you're around. I was around. He made short ribs, the kind that had been in a Dutch oven for 4 hours, with root vegetables and red wine and crusty bread from a bakery 2 streets over. Scout sat by the kitchen island with the patient dignity of a dog who knew she wasn't getting any and had made her peace with it. We ate at his kitchen table. He'd lived in the apartment longer than me. There were signs of actual habitation, a worn throw on the couch, books stacked on the windowsill, a coffee table that looked like he built it himself. I noticed the workbench in the spare bedroom when he went to get something and the door swung open. He pulled it mostly closed, not embarrassed exactly, just private. "What do you do?" I asked. We were on our second glass of wine. It felt like a reasonable point to ask. "Consulting," he said. "What kind?" He set his glass down. "Risk assessment, mostly. I work with companies and some government contracts. I look at vulnerabilities, security gaps, process failures, and tell people where they're exposed before something goes wrong. Like a fixer. More like someone who tells you your roof is going to fail before the storm hits." I thought about that. And then it's up to them whether they listen. He'd been in the army before, he said. 8 years, 2 deployments, left as a captain, went into private consulting because someone he'd served with was starting a firm and asked him to come in. He said all of this the way people say things they'd explained before, without drama or editorializing. "Do you like it?" I asked. He considered this with the seriousness he seemed to bring to most questions. "I'm good at it." "That's not what I asked." Another almost smile. "No, it's not. We did the dishes together. Scout fell asleep on the rug. I went home at 10:30 and lay in bed thinking about short ribs and the way some people take a question seriously enough to actually answer it." February. March. The dinners became a thing not every week, but often enough. Sometimes at his place, sometimes at mine, where I made my mother's chicken tortilla soup and the lemon pasta I'd learned in a fit of self-improvement the previous fall. He always brought wine or bread. He was never late. He cleaned up without being asked. These sound like small things. They are not small things. Joel had once left dishes in the sink for 4 days to see if I'd break first. He called it a household systems issue that we needed to address as partners. I told Garrett this one evening in March. In the vague, edited way, I'd started telling him things about my marriage pieces, not the whole. He listened without interrupting. "He sounds exhausting," Garrett said. He was. I paused. I was exhausted, and I thought it was just marriage, that it was how it worked. It's not how it works. I know that now. He refilled my wine without asking. That was it. No advice, no assessment, no reframing, just acknowledgement and more wine and the comfortable quiet that I'd stopped being afraid of. I realized sometime in March that I'd stopped dreading going home. In April, I got a call from my friend Danny, who knew everyone and heard everything, and she told me that Joel was engaged, 6 months after our separation was finalized, to a woman named Naim, and leaving this detail out because she doesn't deserve to be part of this story, someone he'd apparently been seeing since at least the previous summer. I sat with my phone in my hand in the parking lot of the elementary school where I'd just spent 4 hours working with a 7-year-old who was learning to manage sensory overload. And I thought about the fact that Joel had let me believe for 2 years that the problem was my body. I did not cry. I was too angry to cry. Anger is actually useful. It has direction, it goes somewhere, and I let it go where it needed to go, which was into the evidence I spent the next 3 weeks quietly gathering about the terms of our prenuptial agreement and what, exactly, I had been entitled to and not told. I found an attorney, a real one, mine, not his family's. Her name was Patricia, and she had the calm precision of someone who had seen this particular situation before, many times, and had stopped being surprised by it but had not stopped being thorough. She reviewed the prenup. She reviewed the settlement I'd accepted. She said, "You had more leverage than you used." "I didn't know. Most people don't," she said. "That's generally the point." We filed. Joel called me twice in May. I didn't answer. My attorney did the talking. I had learned, finally, that some conversations don't require my presence. What I didn't expect was Joel to show up at Sycamore Commons on a Wednesday evening in May, when I was coming home from work and he was standing in the lobby with the particular energy of a man who believed that showing up in person was a form of argument. "We need to talk," he said. "We have attorneys," I said. "Elise, Joel. We have attorneys." He followed me to the elevator. He didn't get in when the doors opened, but he stood in the gap, and I pressed the button for 2, and he said, "You're making this harder than it needs to be. You always make things harder than they need to be." The doors tried to close. He put his hand on them. Garrett came around the corner from the mailboxes. He didn't say anything dramatic. He didn't posture. He just walked to the elevator, looked at Joel with a steady measuring assessment as someone who spent his professional life identifying where things were likely to go wrong, and said, "She said she has an attorney." Joel looked at him. "The lobby has cameras," Garrett said, pleasantly, "in case that's useful information." Joel stepped back. The doors closed. I stared at the elevator panel. My hands were steady. I wasn't sure when that had happened. When my hands had started staying steady. Garrett stood next to me, not touching me, just there. "Thank you," I said. "You had it," he said. "I just moved a chair. I need to tell you something about the diagnosis. In June, I was tired in a way that didn't correlate to my sleep, and Danny said something at brunch, and I went to CBS on a Sunday morning and stood in the family planning aisle for a long time before picking up 2 different boxes. Both tests said the same thing. I sat on my bathroom floor for 40 minutes, not crying exactly, just processing the geometry of the situation. I had been separated for 7 months. I was 31 years old. I had a part-time attorney and a full-time job in an apartment with beige walls and a radiator that clicked at 2 a.m. I knocked on Garrett's door that evening. Scout nosed the gap when he opened it. He took one look at me and stepped back to let me in. I told him. All of it exactly as it was. I didn't dress it up or underdress it. I just said the words. He sat across from me at the kitchen table for a moment after I finished. Then he said, "How are you feeling physically?" Not, "Whose is it?" Not, "What are you going to do?" Not, "Are you sure?" "Tired," I said. "A little nauseated in the mornings. You need to see a doctor soon. Good prenatal care starts early." He paused. "I can come with you if you want." "Or not. Whatever helps." I looked at him. "I mean it," he said. "Garrett, I know what I'm saying." I believed him. That was the thing. I believed him. That was the thing. After 5 years of learning to mistrust my own ability to believe people, I believed him, not because he said the right words, but because I had watched him for 6 months be exactly who he appeared to be, consistently, without performance. "Okay," I said. He came to the first appointment. He came to the second one, when they found 2 heartbeats on the ultrasound, and I made a sound that was not quite a word, and the technician handed me a tissue. He drove me home. He made tea. He'd started keeping the kind I liked in his cabinet. And he sat with me while I called my mother. She cried. This time I understood completely why. I should tell you what happened with Joel, because it matters. But not in the way I used to think these things matter. Patricia's investigation, and it became an investigation, because Patricia is thorough turned up a financial disclosure issue in the original prenup negotiation. Joel's family attorney had not been fully transparent about the asset valuation at the time of our marriage. This is a legal problem. It turned out to be Joel's legal problem, specifically in ways that affected his current situation considerably. We reached a new settlement in September. I'm not going to put numbers in this story because they are mine, and because the number isn't the point. The point is that Patricia looked across a conference table at Joel's attorney and said, calmly and with considerable documentation, exactly what the situation was, and Joel, who had spent 5 years of our marriage being calm in ways designed to cost me my confidence, was, for the first time in my experience, not calm at all. I did not enjoy his discomfort. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was much quieter than enjoyment. It was something more like the sensation of a door closing on a room you'd been locked in. Not triumphant, just, finally, the room is behind me. I used part of the settlement to pay the remaining balance on my student loans. I paid 3 months ahead on rent. I opened a savings account with a real contribution. These are not dramatic acts. They are the acts of a person who has stopped waiting for permission to take care of herself. Garrett told me, in October, what he actually did. We were walking with Scout in Bryan Park on a Saturday afternoon. Lee's down, sky that particular shade of October blue that makes Virginia look like a painting of itself, and he stopped on the path and said, I need to tell you something, and I want to tell you before it's a problem. I waited. The consulting firm, it wasn't just risk assessment. He was a partner. A founding partner. The firm worked primarily with federal agencies and a handful of major financial institutions. He had been one of 3 people who built it from a spare bedroom in Alexandria 8 years ago into something that employed 63 people and had contracts I could look up if I wanted to, though most of them were not public. He was, in the vocabulary of the world I'd grown up in, very quietly wealthy, not in the way Joel performed wealth, the shoes, the fundraisers, the name-dropping, but in the way of someone who had built something real and then not changed his life to match it because his life was already what he wanted it to be. Why are you telling me now? I asked. Because you're about to have my children, he said, and you deserve to make decisions with accurate information. I stopped walking. I know that's a lot, he said. It is. I'm the same person I was in September. I know that. I just want to make sure you know the rest of it. He looked out at the park for a moment. I've had people treat me differently when they know. I didn't want that from you. I thought about the battery cables in December, the short ribs in January, the way he'd stood in the elevator lobby in May and said nothing more than was needed. I thought about the ultrasound appointment, and the tea, and the way Scout had eventually decided I was worth her time. You should have told me sooner, I said. Yes. Don't do that again. No. We kept walking. The girls were born in late February, 37 weeks, which the doctors called early but not alarming. 2 of them, which the doctors called a lot, which, yes. Eleanor in June. Eleanor came first, loud and immediate, as if she'd been waiting to have opinions and finally had a venue. June came 4 minutes later, quieter, looking around the room with a focused appraisal of a person assessing a situation before committing to a response. I already knew which one she got that from. My mother was there. She'd driven up from Roanoke the week before and had not, despite my gentle suggestions, left. She held Eleanor first and cried, and then held June and cried differently, and then held my hand and didn't say anything, which was the most eloquent thing anyone did that day. Garrett held both of them in the crook of one arm. He's tall enough. His arms are long enough, and looked at them with the same steady, measuring expression he brought to everything. And then something happened to his face that I had never seen before and that I will not try to describe, because some things are not for other people. I watched him, and I thought about the farmer's market I'd gone to last May, the Saturday after the ultrasound, when I'd bought a ceramic pot, a small one, terracotta with a blue glaze, because the apartment needed something alive in it and had carried it home on the bus feeling absurdly, disproportionately okay. Some containers are the right ones. Some things grow when they're in the right place. Joel found out about Garrett the way Joel finds out about most things, through other people, after the fact. I don't know exactly when or from whom. I know that his attorney contacted Patricia in November with some paperwork-related pretense that Patricia saw through immediately and declined efficiently. I know that Joel at some point learned enough about Garrett to understand the particular shape of what he'd walked away from. I don't carry that around. It isn't mine to carry. What I carry is this: Eleanor in the blue bouncy seat by the window, watching the light move. June on Garrett's chest while he reads something on his laptop, one hand flat on her back like a paperweight. Scout settled between the couch and the coffee table, the one Garrett built, exactly where she's decided she lives now. My mother's voice on Sunday evenings. Patricia's email telling me the final documents had been signed and filed and we were done. The chipped mug made it through the move. The 2 pieces. I kept them both on the windowsill above the kitchen sink in the apartment until we moved into the house in Church Hill in December, a real house, with a yard for Scout and a room each for the girls and a kitchen that gets morning light. I didn't throw the pieces out. I set them on the new windowsill too. Some things you keep not because they're fixed, but because they remind you of what you were carrying when someone met you in the hall and said, simply, without making it a thing, "I can get that." I've thought a lot about what actually changed my life, and the honest answer is that it wasn't one dramatic moment. It was a series of quiet choices made by a person who had stopped performing and started paying attention. When Joel handed me that box with the broken mug and walked back inside without looking back, I believed, on some level, that I had failed. 5 years, and I was leaving with a cardboard box and a $4,000 check and a prenuptial agreement I hadn't understood when I signed it. That felt like a verdict. It took me a long time to understand it was only the end of the wrong chapter, not a judgment on who I was or what I was worth. What I did in those months after getting my own attorney, filing, learning the difference between what I'd been told I deserved and what I was actually owed, that wasn't revenge. It wasn't even strategy. It was just the first time in 5 years I treated myself as someone whose interests were worth protecting. Patricia didn't give me anything. She helped me see what had already been mine. That distinction matters more than I can explain. And Garrett. I think about how easy it would have been to miss him, to be so deep in the noise of a failing marriage and then the silence of its aftermath that I never actually looked up long enough to see who was across the hall. He didn't announce himself. He didn't perform goodness. He just did quiet, consistent, reliable things that added up over time into something I could trust. That's rarer than it sounds. I had spent 5 years in a marriage where trust was something I had to constantly renegotiate, and I didn't fully understand what I'd lost until I found myself in a kitchen eating short ribs with someone who asked a question and actually waited for the answer. You get what you keep accepting. I know that now, not as a judgment of who I was when I was 28 and signing papers I didn't read. I was doing the best I could with what I understood then. But as something true, the version of me who kept quiet, who didn't push on the prenup, who let Joel define what our problem was, and whose body was to blame that version of me, was operating from a belief that I didn't have the right to take up more space than I was given. Figuring out that was wrong, and then choosing differently, was the actual turning point, not the settlement, not even Garrett. The moment I walked into Patricia's office and said, "I think I was misled, and I'd like to understand what my options are." Eleanor is 4 months old now. June is 4 months old. They are entirely themselves already, in the way that babies somehow are from the very first week. Eleanor loud and immediate, June watchful and measuring. I look at them and I think about what I want them to understand someday. Not that the world is fair, because it isn't always. Not that good things happen to good people on any reliable schedule. But that the choices you make about how to treat yourself with honesty, with patience, with the willingness to ask for what you're actually owed, those choices compound. They build something. And eventually, if you keep making them, you look up and realize you're standing in morning light in a kitchen in Church Hill, with 2 daughters and a man who means what he says, and the broken pieces of an old mug on the windowsill, and the room you're in is exactly the right one.